Okay, now we're going to talk about color enhancement techniques and how we can have perfect saturation in our videos. So first of all, I'm going to go to the settings and uncheck the vertical resolution box. When I press save, I have my view in horizontal again. So in the previous sections, we worked on white balance, fixed the lighting, the primary lighting fixing, and then we also worked on the contrast. Now we're going to work on different techniques. For example, how to boost colors, how to use saturation in our videos, and how to use different tools to bump up the saturation overall, as well as work on different parts of the video. Because sometimes you would want to bump up the saturation and the colors overall in your video, but sometimes you would want to bump up specific colors while letting the other colors remain as is. So let's see what we have to do. The first step to work on saturation is to dial in your white balance correctly, work on your primary lighting, as well as your contrast. This is because what happens is, if all of these are not set incorrectly, your saturation is not going to be dialed in properly. So we always move to saturation once we're done with these steps. So I'll show you how to work on saturation over here in this section. First of all, I'm gonna go and move to the color wheel section because I want you to get used to these areas. And I'm gonna hold on Option and press S to create a new node. I'm gonna call this SAT, which stands for saturation. So we're gonna talk about a couple of different options over here. First one is color boost. Let's talk about that. What does color boost do? Color boost basically bumps up the colors that are subtle in your video. For example, if I click on the color boost slider and start moving it towards the right, it's gonna bump up the colors that are very slightly present in my video. For example, the skin and other areas. If I take it up drastically, it's gonna make my video look hideous, which is something I don't want to do. So I'm only gonna use it whenever I need it. This is one of the basic methods to bump up colors in your video. The other method that I use is saturation. So saturation is usually and always at 50. That is the starting point. If you take it to 0, it's going to take all of the colors outside of your video, but that's not what we want to do. So I'm going to go to the point 0, which is 50. And if I click and drag it towards the right, do you see it bumps up the overall colors in my video? So it's bumping up colors in the skin of the subjects, their clothes, the leaves, the flowers, everything. So if I turn it off, this is how everything looks naturally, just in Rec 709. If I turn it on, this is how it looks with the saturation bumped up. So remember, whenever you want to bump up colors and everything in your video, and this is going to come in the later section, probably one of the last sections where I'm going to teach you specific things about skin and everything, we don't want our skin to look oversaturated. That is a big no-no in color grading. It makes things look very unnatural. So that's not something we want to do. So I don't want my colors and everything to look like this, but I want everything else to look like this. And this is what we'll do in the next videos. So I'm gonna bring saturation back to 50 because I was just showing you how it works. Then you have hue. Hue basically means color, so it's also starting at 50. If I click and drag it towards the right, it just changes up colors in my video. If I drag it to the left, it changes up colors even further. So see what's happening on my vector scope. Everything is rotating crazily. Its starting point is 50. So I'm gonna bring it back to 50. I never really use hue, honestly. Over here, the slider, unless I have a very, very basic project where I have to drastically change the colors in a music video. Otherwise, no, honestly. When I bump up saturation in my videos, I never bring it up to 100. It makes things look very hideous. Look at that. I don't want that, right? Even when I will bring down my skin tone colors and everything, even these are looking like super way saturated. I don't want that. So the value that I really keep it at is probably somewhere around 60, depending on the video. Or sometimes I'll take it up to 80. But I'll teach you how to bring down the skin color and everything if everything else is saturated. That's something we're gonna learn. But right now I'm gonna bring it back to 50 because I was just teaching you how that works. So I hope this gives you a basic understanding of how these sliders work. And in the next section, we're gonna work with the hue curves and the color curves and everything else. Okay, so now we're going to talk about curves and the hue curves. So they're not found in the color wheel section. For those, we will need to go to the curve section. With the saturation node selected, I will go to the curve section, and it's going to automatically make me land on the contrast curves first. I don't want that. I want to go to the curves where I can read different color intensities and change them and the luminance and everything else. So how do I go to those? Over here, this is the contrast curve that they have highlighted over here. This is where you land first, but here there are different options: hue versus hue, hue versus saturation, hue versus luminance, luminance versus saturation, saturation versus saturation, and saturation versus luminance. All of these have very specific purposes, and when we start going through them, you will start to find out exactly what they mean and why they have different curves for different purposes. So I'm gonna go to the hue versus hue curve. First of all, when I first started, I thought like, what is hue versus hue? What does that mean? Well, that's all about changing one specific type of color in your footage. How do I do that first of all? So here on the graph, you will see different waves. This basically tells you which colors are present in a lot of amounts in your video. So over here, I can see that there's a lot of blue and a certain type of blue, which is from the guy's blazer. Then there's a lot of yellows and everything. That's because there's a lot of sunlight falling on our subjects. And her hair is blonde, that falls within yellows. Her skin and his skin and even his hair also fall within that. Then we also have a little bit of reds. So over here, this is mainly because of the skin tones, as well as some of the leaves. Some of the hair also falls in these skin tones. Sorry, some of the hair also falls within these tones. And then a little bit of the flowers. But this is basically going to give you an intensity of which color is present in your footage in what amount. If I click, so this is where 0.0 is. This is where your saturation is at 0.0. If I click and drag it upwards, do you see how the same thing happens? This is like the hue slider. So if I move it up altogether, it changes the hue overall. Hue is basically color. So hue versus hue means color versus color, right? And if I bring it down, it changes it again to a whole other set of colors. So basically the hue curve, what you do with it is you can specifically select certain colors and change their tone and colors and everything. And I can do two things to undo it. Probably press here and reset it, or I can go here and press reset node grade. So why do I want to use this? Because sometimes when I'm shooting from different angles, the skin tone of my subject looks different from different angles because light is falling on them from different angles. Sometimes there's mixed lighting, sometimes there's other temperature of lighting falling on their skin. So this is where hue versus hue comes in handy because I can sample their skin tone and then change the color according to that. That is for very big projects, like where I have a lot of budget and they're paying me a lot more. First of all, I also want to introduce you to the eyedropper that we have. So do you see that when I have this hue versus hue curve selected, whenever I hover over my footage, it gives me the eyedropper again as well as the values. And I'll show you exactly how I can select certain colors. Let's say I want to change the blue of the guy's blazer. I'm gonna click and drag the eyedropper a little bit to sample more colors. And see, it creates 3 points on my curve. Why is that? Because this is the color of the blazer that it's sampled. You never just go ahead and click at one part because that's not going to do the sampling correctly. You have to do it like I showed you. Click and drag and then leave your mouse button. And this is the end of that color range that it has selected. So you see when I told you that this high wave in the background is from the guy's blazer, this is exactly what it selected. Let's say I want to change his blazer's color. So I'm going to click and drag it downwards. So do you see what's happening? His color changed, the color of his blazer. And let's say if I play the video, look, it's going to be changed everywhere. So now it's going to look purple. If I boost the saturation, it's going to look purple. And if I want to bring it to 0.0, I'm simply going to right click with my mouse button and it's going to let go. And if I want to simply undo it, I'm going to press Control Z, come back to the point, blazer is back to its original color. And then if I bring it upwards, it's going to change colors again. So if I go ahead, now his blazer is green, right? But you see there's a lot of noise in his blazer. I'm going to zoom in and show you. That's because, and then you see a lot of blue over here too, a little bit on his tie and everything. That's because this is a 10-bit video. If this was shot in RAW, I would have more range to select the colors. I would discourage you from selecting and changing the colors and everything on 10-bit. Don't qualify colors like that in 10-bit because that really does change things around a lot, and 10-bit also doesn't give you that dynamic range. This is for when you have raw videos that have that dynamic range because they are so much larger than 10-bit and 8-bit that they have a lot more color range. But this is just to give you an example as to how things are done. And I'm going to press reset all and go back to the first point. Then I want to show you hue versus saturation. So I went from this curve, hue versus hue, to this curve, hue versus saturation. Now here, this is again telling me the graph, the waves and everything is telling me which color exists in which amount and how much. So I have a lot of blue, I have a significant amount of warm colors, and I can do the same thing. So if I click on the slider anywhere and I take it up, it increases my saturation. If I bring it to this line, it brings it to 0.0, the starting point, which is 1.00. If I bring it down, it's gonna take out the colors from my video altogether. If I press this, it resets everything. So this is where I want to teach you about a little bit about how to work around the skin and everything. So since my skin and everything usually exists around reds, yellows, and somewhere around the oranges, like between the yellows and the red, I'm going to steer away from selecting these colors and going ahead and bumping them up because that is going to oversaturate my skin. So let's say I only want the blue blazer to stand out. So I'm going to do the same thing again. Click and drag. This is going to sample the blue color of the blazer and then give me the points on the curve. So if I click and drag it upwards, the blazer becomes really saturated. If I click and bring it down, it becomes unsaturated. If I bring it here, it's 0.0. But see, if I bring it up, I'm still left with a couple of points, see? Outside and everything. So how do I fix that? Well, when I sample my colors, for example, I'm going to reset this. When I sample my colors, click and drag, it gives me the points. What I will do is I will click on this point, go to input hue, drag it a little bit towards the right so that it widens the range of the color that is selected. Because you see there's still blue over here that's selected. Those are those parts that were left out before. I will also click, because if you look at this point and you look over here, right downwards, do you see it's cutting off a chunk of the blue? That's why it's leaving that part out. So if I click over here, go to input hue and click and drag my mouse button towards the left and widen the range, now it's going to give me a much better range to select from and increase the saturation of the color. So now when I click the middle circle and drag it upwards, this will have a much better effect. It will still leave some stuff out. For example, look over here, but it does a much better job. So let's do this again. I'm gonna select, I can also click and drag from here too, like bring it here, bring this here, because you also have to eyeball it a little bit yourself too. I don't want to go too much into purple because I don't want to increase the saturation of purple. I just want to show you an example with blue. So click and drag. I just want to see how I can affect the overall color, like over here. So go back, and then this has a much better effect. It's also affecting his tie. This part is still unsaturated, so I'm gonna reset it and see how that works. So click and drag, and it samples the same color. So yes, again, that's because this is 10-bit. And I usually don't do a lot of sampling and everything on 10-bit. I sometimes do, yes, I do. But when there's a lot of colors in my video, for example, over here, like there's so many color ranges and everything, then I will steer away a little bit from it. But let's go ahead and do it. Or the other thing is I can make a couple more points, click and drag them up. You can make more points by simply clicking and then dragging up like that. And then that's going to determine how much saturation your thing is going to have. So let's see. Looks better. Let's say I want to show you how if I increase the saturation overall, it's also going to increase the saturation of my skin tones, right? And that's what I don't want. So let's say if I want to select certain colors. Let's say if I only want to select blue, I can also select certain colors from here. So let's say I want to select blue. I'm going to click over here. It's going to give me the range for blue. And then I can go ahead and increase it and maybe create more points. See, it's giving me a much wider range. Create more points like that. And it does almost the same thing. But sometimes it's also going to select other areas of blue because there's a little bit of blue here too, see. If I turn it off, that goes away. If I turn it on, it comes back. I'm just going to reset it. If I only want the purples to stand out, I can click and drag to sample the purple color. And then I will widen the range just a little bit. If I widen it here, click and drag to the right, it's gonna come over here because this part runs into this part and becomes overall all of this again. So if I click and drag, look at the flowers, right? It's only affecting the flowers. So let's say I only want to affect the flowers right now, right? Then maybe a little bit of the green, click and drag. Drag. Now this is where it's going to start affecting the skin tones, I think. No, thankfully it's not. Okay. So I increased the saturation of the flowers and the leaves and everything, the green parts. So this is how it looks before. This is how it looks after. One thing I want you to notice is when I increase the saturation, it also increased the brightness of the flowers. So this is how they looked before, and now they're also looking brighter. Sometimes this is going to be an issue, and I'll teach you exactly how to deal with that, because sometimes you want something, let's say you have something red and you increase its saturation, right? The flowers, for example, they were of a dark, dull color, and when I increased their saturation, they became really bright pink, right? Now it's taking attention away from the subject. How do I deal with that? That's where I come towards hue versus luminance. How does that work? Luminance controls the brightness or the darkness of a color. So if I click and sample the same pink that I increased the saturation for, and I click and drag here, and I click and drag this part to increase my range, what's going to happen is when I bring this up, it makes my flowers brighter because this is hue versus luminance, the brightness of a certain color. Just like here, we can use a certain color and change its color. Like we can change this pink, for example, to quickly showing you purple, green, whatever. We can use the hue versus luminance curve to control the brightness or the darkness of a certain color. So I sample the pink, and if I bring my point really high up, that makes my color brighter. It's already saturated, it's making it brighter. And notice how increasing the saturation makes my color spread out on the vector scope. So if I bring it 2.0, this is how it was looking. And increasing the saturation already made it brighter. But if I want to make it darker like before, I'm going to click and drag it downwards. See? So if I turn this off, it looks like this. So now my flower has almost the same amount of brightness. It's just that the saturation is getting affected. So the hue versus luminance comes in really handy. Like for example, I'm going to show you another example. I'm going to go back to the hue versus saturation curve, right? So here I'm going to click and drag my eyedropper to sample the blue of the guy's blazer. I'm going to really increase my color range this time because I want to get as much of the blue as possible. And remember, I am on the hue versus saturation curve. If I press the middle circle, bring it up, it's making the blazer brighter as well. Take a look. If I turn it off, this is how the blazer looked. This is how it looks now, and it's also looking brighter. What if I want to make it a darker blue? Can I do that? Yes, I can do that. I will go to hue versus luminance. Do the same thing. Click and drag to sample the color of the blazer. Increase my dynamic range, my color range, sorry. to get as much of blue as possible. And then if I take this tiny circle and click and drag it upwards, that makes the blazer brighter. If I click and drag it downwards, it makes the blazer darker. So this is how it was originally looking as far as I remember and as far as I can see. See? So it has the same amount of brightness or darkness. It's just that the blazer now looks more saturated. So hue versus luminance really helps us when we want to control the brightness of a color, because when you add saturation to a color, when you saturate a color, that also affects its brightness. The more saturation you add, the brighter the color becomes. I'm going to show you another example. For example, here we have the boy and the girl that we had. So I'm going to create another node and call it SAT, S-A-T. And let's say I'm going to go to the hue versus saturation curve. Let's say I want to increase the teal color saturation on the boy's shirt. So I'm going to click and drag and sample the color. It gives me the range for the color. I can either click and drag it or click and drag the input hue slider to increase the range, right? Just being careful because I don't want to dive into the blues right now. So while I'm on the hue versus saturation slider, I'm going to click the middle dot, which is the color, and bring it up. So do you see how it's affecting the guy's shirt? When I bring it up, the saturation increases. When I bring it down, it unsaturates it. This is how it was looking at 0.0. I'm going to bring it up, probably up till over here. If I turn it off, do you see how the shirt was a little bit darker? And with saturation added to it, it looks a bit brighter. I'm going to zoom in and show it to you. So this is how it looks with saturation dialed in, and this is how it looks without it. So this is looking a little bit lighter than before. So how do I fix the brightness of the color? I'm going to go to the hue versus luminance curve. Again, click and drag to sample the color. Increase the dynamic range, color range, I apologize. And then if I bring it up, it makes the color lighter. If I bring it down, it also makes the color darker. But here it's also starting to affect my subject's phone, and we don't want that. So I'm gonna bring this closer, probably around here. Let's see, somewhere around here. This is why I don't really do a lot of sampling in 10-bit, because this is why I don't do a lot of sampling when I'm working with a footage where there are a lot of colors. And then again, there are a lot of colors over here, like similar ones, like teal, blue, and blue. They all fall under blue, right? So if the subject, let's say, was wearing an orange shirt, that would be perfect because it wouldn't collide with the blue of the phone or the blue of the other subject shirt. So with the range selected within what I'm looking at, what I want it to be, I'm gonna click and drag it up or down, and now it's still affecting it though. So let's just focus on the shirt. Maybe the phone also looks fine, it's okay. It doesn't matter if the phone looks darker too, because that's gonna make the color look more dense. So turn it off, this is how it looks. Turn it on, this is how it looks. I'm gonna go ahead, zoom in and show you guys. So when I turn it off, this is how it looks. Turn it on, this is how it looks. So I'm also at the same time sampling the color and controlling its brightness. Again, if I want to select certain colors, let's say magenta, it's gonna give me that. So if I have any of those in my video, I can control those. That's also one way of working with the colors, or the better way is that you can click and drag it. So if I click and drag, it gives me the color. And then I can go ahead and control its luminance and the hue versus luminance curve, or the hue versus saturation curve for the saturation of the color, or just the color itself. I can change it. For example, if I want to change the color of the bed sheet, increase the range just a little bit on both sides, and then but it's also affecting their lips because their lips are pink. So that's why when there are a lot of conflicting colors, that's why I don't use these options when there are a lot of conflicting colors. Otherwise, if there are conflicting colors, then I would prefer that the video is in RAW, because the color range is so much wider and so much bigger when compared to 10-bit and 8-bit. So I hope you understood this part of the curves, the hue curves and everything. In the next lesson, I'm going to teach you about the saturation curves, the luminance versus saturation and everything else. All right, see you in the next lesson. Okay, so another setting that I want to introduce you to in terms of the curves is the saturation versus saturation curve. So here we stopped, I think, around here. I'm going to teach you about luminance versus saturation. I don't really use it, but I'm just going to teach you about it. So here in the luminance and all of the curves after it, these are our highlights, the brighter areas. These are our midtones, and these are our shadows. That's why you have whites and then grays and then blacks. But if I create a point over here and bring it up and down, it just affects my overall saturation. The curve that I use after that is a saturation versus saturation curve. So you have your bright levels over here, the highlights, midtones around here, and the shadows. What I want to do is I want to work on making my shadows unsaturated. If you want your videos to look cinematic, you have to take the saturation out of your shadows. Your blacks should look black. They shouldn't have any other color overcast over them. So what I do is, around this area, I bring it down. That's how it takes all of the saturation outside of my shadows. And then I will create a point somewhere around here where it starts becoming midtones. And then I will bring it up like this. So here there's going to be a curve that is going to be taking my saturation outside of my shadows. So here, looking very closely, there's going to be a very subtle difference. So I'm going to go full screen, press Command D. It's going to take all of the saturation. This is going to undo it, sorry. Press Command D, and it's going to take all of the saturation outside of my shadows. All of the areas that are probably here, like the extremely dark parts here, like dark part here, here, and everything else. This is the only other curve that I use when I'm color grading my videos. And then if I go back to my color wheels and I increase my saturation, let's say up to 65, it is only going to affect my midtones and my highlights, and it's not going to affect my blacks in the shadows. I don't want any overcast. So I hope this video answers your questions, and if you have any other questions, if you don't understand anything, please get in touch with me and I will answer your questions and clear your confusions. Next up, we have Color Slice. Color Slice is a new section introduced by DaVinci Resolve in the later versions, and it's a really powerful tool. I sometimes use it when I have to do very specific stuff, but there are other things that you can do without it, and you don't really have to use it completely. It's just about your comfort zone. So, if you like working with Color Slice later on, please go ahead and use it. If you don't like it, then there are other things that you can do without Color Slice using other tools. Where is Color Slice? It is right next to the curves. So I'll click on Color Slice and it's going to take me to all of the settings that it offers, all of the options that I have. So Color Slice basically affects the saturation and the density of the colors, just like I taught you with the previous settings. I'll show you how it works. For example, I have red over here. This area that's lightened up, this is where the reds are being selected, the reds that we can work with. If I click on this and drag it to either of the sides, see how it's affecting the center point? And it's affecting some of the other sections too. It's also affecting magenta. It's also affecting the skin part because skin also lies within the warmer sides. So if I want to bump up red, this is going to be, let's see what it does. This either makes the red dark or bright. So this comes in really handy. And this controls the saturation of the red. It's going to make it really saturated or very unsaturated. So let's say I make it saturated somewhere around here, and then I make it dense. So this is how it's going to work. This is how it was before, and this is how it looks after. So the same thing that I taught you about selecting certain colors and increasing their saturation with the saturation curve, the hue versus saturation curve, and also working with the luminance curves, Color Slice also offers you the same things. I don't have the option to select certain colors with the dropper and everything because that's not one of the options that it gives me. I can also, let's say, make the skin dark or really bright. So it's not only going to affect the skin, it's also going to affect other areas that lie within the same color range. So this is somewhere around orange, red turning into yellow. It's also going to affect those. If I want to go back to the previous settings, I'm simply going to press reset. And this is how it affects the saturation. So if I want my skin to be slightly saturated, I'll do this. This is how it looked before. This is how it looks after. And if I want to change the density of the color after working with the saturation, I can drag it up or drag it down. This is making it really bright. This is making it really dark. Then we have something for cyan over here. Let's see if it affects the shirt. Yep, it does. So that's making it really dense. And I'm also increasing the saturation. If I bring it down, it makes all of the cyans and the blues and everything else that's within the range brighter. And if I take it up, it's gonna make it darker. So I don't really use Color Slice a lot. Let's see with a couple of other settings. Saturation bumps up the overall saturation, the saturation slider. The density slider overall affects the density in every color. 0 is the starting point. If I drag it towards the left, it makes everything brighter. If I click and drag it towards the right, it makes everything darker. So I just reset all the settings, and let's say I want to bump up the overall saturation. I can do that from here. I'll click the saturation slider, drag it a little bit towards the right, not too much. I don't want it extremely oversaturated, just like slightly saturated so that it's pleasing to the eye. And if I click and drag saturation depth, that really affects the depth of the saturation in my video. Slightly, not too much. Then you have saturation balance. So since I bumped up the saturation, Let's see what saturation balance does. I'm gonna click and drag it towards the right. It affects it a little bit. Click and drag it towards the left. Slightly takes out the brightness. That's it. Not too much of a difference. Hue does the same thing, changing the overall hue of my video. And that's about it. I'm gonna bring it back to 0. I have everything reset in terms of my hue. So Color Slice is a really powerful tool, but it's not the only tool that you're gonna use to work with saturation and colors and everything else. I don't really use it a lot, but maybe you will like it. These are the things that it really does affect. And remember, when you move the center, either towards the right or the left, it is just going to affect the color range that it's going to select for you. So if you really like working with it, I'm just going to reset it. If you really like working with it after experimenting with it, please go ahead and start working on it. Otherwise, there are other tools as well that you can utilize. It really depends on what is your comfort zone and which tools you're going to end up liking. We're reaching the end of our section on saturation and color, and I'll be giving you a couple of demos on how to put everything into practice. So stay tuned, and I will see you in the next lesson. So now I'm going to teach you how to use HSL Qualifier. It's a very powerful tool which I use to isolate certain colors when I'm working with the RAW. Remember to avoid using it with 10-bit footage as well as 8-bit because they don't give you that much dynamic range for this tool to be used. Whereas HSL, it can be found right next to the Color Warper tool, and it's called as the qualifier. But when you click on it, you will see the entire name, HSL Qualifier. So what does it stand for? It stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. These are the three main factors that you can use to select and isolate colors based on their colors, of course, their saturation, as well as their luminance, which is their brightness or darkness. So let's say, so for example, I created this look and I'm going to show you exactly what I did, just so you're familiar with it. And I will also show you my workflow in the next lesson when we come to the end of this section. So I've worked on my exposure, just like, fixing the lighting and everything. I'll quickly show you what I did. I did stuff around here a little bit. Then I worked on the contrast, just like I showed you in the previous section. And I created the look a little bit. What I did was, like I showed you in the first few lessons, when we were discussing the color wheels, I messed around with the settings, like around here. Like I dragged it over to the yellow and the red, and then some of them, like the midtones towards the greens. And then just a little bit in the shadow area. So remember, it's not that I wanted my shadows to have a color. I use this because the darkest part of my midtones and everything is also going to be affected. So lift mainly affects shadows, but I also, of course, will desaturate the blacks of my shadows because that is what is going to make my video look aesthetically pleasing. So this is how I created the look, by slightly changing stuff around here in the color wheels. And then I bumped up the saturation up to 65, from 50 to 65. And this is how I was able to create this look. But I want to show you how I can use the HSL qualifier tool to isolate certain colors and how you can do that when you're working with your videos. So there are a couple of things that you can do with it. First, I will create a separate node. This is just for HSL. I'll bring it down here because there's going to be a lot of nodes in the first row. And the first thing we do is like whenever we select our qualifier section, it automatically assigns the eyedropper to us. Let's say I want to isolate the greens because I want to work on some parts of the greens. What I'll do is I'll do the same thing to sample the colors. I will click and drag to sample the green. And do you see it already assigned some stuff around here? So this hue basically gives us the range of the color that we can select. And how do I know what kind of colors and what range it's selected? I will go up here into the highlight icon and I will click it. This is going to show me all of the areas that are selected. So the areas and everything that I can see are the areas that are selected that have some sort of green in them. The reason it selected a lot of them is because over here, when I was creating my look, I did create some of the looks around shades of green. That's why whatever it has the slightest bit of green, it's selecting it. But there is a way to go about it. So I'll go to my node over here. Let me just label it HSL for your ease. And then I only want to isolate the part where we have the green leaves. How do I do that? So I have these pointers over here that I can click. So if my mouse is between these two pointers and I move around the range, do you see how it affects the selection? And I can go from one end and come back out of the other end. But what if I want to make my selection smaller? I just want the area where we have the green leaves. I can grab either of these ends and start bringing them closer to one another. And as I do that, parts of my leaves are disappearing. So this is a little bit tricky. And this is why I was saying that it gets a little bit trickier when you're working with 10-bit because that doesn't give you that much of a dynamic range that you need for this tool. So how can I further isolate it? Let's say I'm like, okay, let's see where I get the best part of the leaves. And maybe I need to increase the dynamic range to get all of them. Now, how can I further work with saturation and everything else? Let's see. So, oops, sorry. So if I increase or decrease saturation, based on the saturation of the elements, I can also take the elements out of my selection or bring them into my selection. But I usually like to have a bigger selection because, you can have all kinds of saturation. Then you have luminance based on the brightness or the darkness of the objects that you want to select. So I already have been assigned a range when I sampled the color with my color dropper tool. If I click and drag it to either of the sides, based on the brightness of those objects, it basically takes them out of the selection and brings them into the selection. So the lady that we have over here and the door and everything, those are the brighter parts. So that gives me that edge where I can only try to select the leaves. So I'll try to bring this towards the part where we have the dark part of the leaves. And I'm going to try to see how. So this is something that's going to happen to you. Because again, it's not a tool that's built very well for 10-bit or 8-bit. Those don't have that much color range. So I'm going to click and drag this part towards the dark part so that I get the leaves and everything outside of it, but that is also going to take a chunk of the leaves outside of my selection. I only want to isolate those areas, right? And I'm getting the girl in there somehow, which is where we run into the limitations of this tool. There's another way of doing it, and I'll show you exactly how. But let's see how I can use this to change, let's say, the brightness and everything else, right? I just want to show you how the tool works. Trying to see how I can get the girl out as much as I can. So it's only letting me select one shade. Probably, sorry, not one shade, just a couple of shades. I'm trying to isolate the leaves as much as I can. So I can isolate a portion of the leaves, not them in entirety. And that's fine for now. Let's see. So how does the HSL qualifier work? And what is the purpose? So now I've isolated a part of the leaves and everything. What do I do next? Well, I can hit highlight and it will bring me outside of the selection view. If you look inside the node, the part that I selected is still selected. What can I do with it? I can do all kinds of things with it. For example, if I go to offset and I click and drag it towards blue, do you see how it's changing the color of only that portion? So this also works like the curves where I was able to isolate one color and then I was able to manipulate it. But that was only manipulating the color of that particular thing when I was isolating its color. Here, I can also do different kinds of things. Let's say I want the leaves to have more contrast, so I can give them more contrast without affecting the other parts of the image. Just showing you that for now. For example, look at here when we have the node off, and this is how it looks when it's on. But I'm going to go ahead and reverse my settings because I don't want that. I can also go ahead and maybe work on the highlights of the leaves, maybe make them brighter because that's what I want to show. And then maybe just bring down the shadow so that it has more contrast. So if I turn it off, this is how it looked, bland and everything. And if I turn it on, this is how it has more of a dynamic look and feel to it. Again, I'm gonna undo my settings with gain and everything. Let's say I want my leaves to have a certain tint or a certain cast of temperature. So let's say I want them to be more green. So do you see how they're greener now? Like that. When I have raw footage that's that has a bigger dynamic range, of course, because it's not 10-bit, I use it to bump up the saturation. So see how I can only work on the saturation of the leaves. So when I have raw, that really helps with the isolation of colors and everything. But this is a good example where I will be able to teach you. I'm gonna press Command Z. If I want, I can go ahead and change the hue, parts of it, just like that. But again, the same thing. This is 10-bit, so I don't really want to isolate the colors here because it doesn't really give me that much range. I can't do a lot of stuff. Let's say I want to increase the overall brightness, let's say like that, and then bring down my lift a little bit, give it a bit of color boost. See how the emphasis is now going more towards the leaves, and then maybe change the hue just a little bit, let's say like that. So this is all of the stuff that I can do with the HSL qualifier by qualifying certain parts and then going ahead and working with them. So I hope you understand this section, this lesson. I will give you another example of this. So over here, I have a footage. This is not log, but that doesn't matter because I can still go ahead and work on stuff around it. I want to show you how I can isolate different colors using HSL. So I want to isolate the red over here. And yes, it is going to coincide with this because the brake lights are also red. But we'll see. This isn't log, this is already in Rec 709, but that doesn't matter. I just want to show you how the HSL qualifier works. So this is 10-bit. Again, that's why when I select this part, it is going to select parts of the brake light, but I'll show you how later on you can also use one other tool, which is the windows, to isolate the areas that you only want. So I'll go to HSL and then same thing, click and drag. And do you see on my node how it's already selecting the colors? So I have it up till here, but I want to select a little bit of the other parts too. Let's say I want to subtract some parts or add some parts. What do I do? Here I have, because if I go ahead again, it's going to start selecting it again, right? So I don't want to do that. I want to add or subtract from my current selection. So you have the minus tool over here and the tool that adds stuff. Let's say I want to add stuff. I want to add the brake lights too. Let's say I want to change the colors of the brake lights. So I will select this tool with the plus sign and then go ahead and start isolating the areas where I have the brake lights, right? Like this. And let's say I don't want these white areas. What do? I have the subtract tool. I can go ahead and start subtracting it. So, and then another thing I can do is, again, with luminance, because this part is darker compared to this part, I can bring down the luminance. It's going to get rid of the white parts. And when it's completely gone, I can go ahead and start changing the colors. Here, I want to introduce you to one more tool, which is very important within the HSL qualifier. And that is, if you look around the edges of this, if you look around the edges of the selection, you see that they're really jagged, they're really sharp. I don't want, if I'm changing my color, I don't want my color to look so rough and everything with the edges. So what do? I'll go to this section over here and see if I can go to part number 2. And here you will have an option that says denoise. What does denoise do? Let's see. Denoise basically decreases the jagged edges. So if I click on denoise and I start dragging it towards the right, see how it blurs the selection? I don't want that, and I don't want it to 0. So what do? I slightly bring it up so that those areas are not too jagged, the difference is not too much when I am changing the colors. I don't want things to be so extreme and everything. So let's start to change the color now. I can go to the color wheels and let's say I want the blue to purple to be, let's say, somewhere around here. I can do that, but this is going to look fake. I can change the color using hue. That is going to be a much natural shift. So let's say the car has purple brakes. Now let's take a look at it. This looks much more natural, right? Let's take a look at it in full screen. It looks much better now. This looks much more natural. It looks much better now. But, okay, let's say I want to change the color to green. Back to red. Blue, teal, something like that. Let's see. And then if you go ahead, again, this is the thing that's happening. I don't want the colors and everything like this. That's why I don't use it on 10-bit. And if I hadn't used denoise, I will show you exactly what would have happened. If I don't use denoise and it's on 0, do you see how the jagged edges and everything is like over here too, even over here? When I bump up denoise, it sort of blends it too. There are going to be areas that are not going to be selected. I'm going to try my best because, again, 10-bit has its limitations. but here we go. I'm pretty sure it's selected some other area too, but it's okay. So denoise is a very important option that you have to work with because otherwise your edges are not going to look that good and colors are going to shred and everything. This is going to make the transition from your selection to the part that's not selected much smoother. So let's say I want to change it. I changed it to blue and I want to bump up its offset, add a little bit of temperature, maybe just a little bit. Take it towards purple. It looks hideous. Change the hue to green and only bump up the saturation of this part, let's say. It's touching the box, so that tells me that I'm reaching my limit. But this is how it's gonna look and looks pretty natural, right? There's a slight part of red and everything, but we don't see it too much because of denoise. You'll see it now here. Do you see this part? Because it didn't select this part. So that's why I don't use it on 10-bit. And then there's noise and everything. But we can get rid of the noise later on. I will give you settings to the noise node and everything. So I hope you understand the power of this tool. This is a very powerful tool that I use whenever I'm working with raw videos. Just dedicate a little bit of time to practicing it and you will get the hang of it. If there are any questions, please feel free to send me your questions and I will get back to you with the answers within 24 hours.